And as mentioned, the Reserve Bank boss has given an enlightening speech today in which he warned about the public's reaction to scandals in the finance sector and the effects of flat wage growth. Dr. Lowe said people don't feel happy or confident in their future prospects. That's even despite strong jobs figures.
So is that how you feel? Well, for tonight's Taking Stock, we're joined by Angela Fthulkas, founder of the Small Business Party, and Greg Baxter, partner of Newgate Communications, which is a good panel because I feel like you kind of get the big end of town and the smaller end of town with the big and the small business.
Size and height-wise.
Also size and height-wise, which I relate to because Chris is a whole foot taller than me as well.
But we work it out with the chair height.
Anyway, we digress. So we're talking about flat wages diminishing our sense of shared prosperity, yes?
Yeah. Well, I thought great speech by the Governor. I don't think there's any doubt that that the prosperity hasn't trickled down in the way that the economic purists would have had us believe. And as you said in the intro, flat wages growth now since around 2012 means that people are struggling and they're suffering. They're not and they're not getting a sense of the prosperity that the rest of the country's enjoying. That is a huge issue. It's the thing that's informed the election of Trump. It's the thing that's informed Brexit. It's happening in a bunch of Western democracies. And I think he was right to point it out, as I think he said it was one of the biggest economic, social and political issues that we face. And that's precisely the kind of insight I think we need from someone like the Governor of the Reserve Bank, who's above politics but can call it for what it is.
This is all about...
And he did.
Yeah,
he
what
did.
Did you think?
It was. I mentioned to Greg off air before. I felt it was a wise speech. He addressed many issues. He was quite strong on some. I mean, he talked about trust. That we need trust in our institutions. That the wages issue is a true challenge for good economic growth and prosperity. He touched on the Banking Royal Commission. He talked about poor conduct, the fact that there weren't real consequences happening for the poor conduct. And then I thought it was quite interesting when he talked about globalisation and how that's affecting our labour force and what they've got to look forward to, which is probably why they're not feeling that happy. And it's interesting because we used to talk about the workforce being happy tongue-in-cheek, but it's actually something that is quite serious now because people do fear for their jobs.
Well, I think I think that's right, and I think he talked about the fact that people have lost confidence that living standards are going to increase, or even if they do, whether they'll be the beneficiary of that, that they'll be left behind, and then that's feeding this anxiety that used to be primarily confined to manufacturing workers, is now feeding this anxiety among white-collar workers who aren't, I think, particularly concerned about their immediate job security, but there's this growing unease about what the next 5 or 10 years looks like.
Or not even with every restructuring that happens. I mean, we saw that in my business all the time. As soon as there was some kind of restructure, 400 or 500 people in the building would lose their job because it would be offshore. So that affects local economies immediately. He
gave the example as well of say a PA, and now you can have an executive with a PA who's actually maybe overseas.
Getting $10 an hour.
Getting $10 an hour.
Doesn't 40 or $50 an hour.
You can go on your computer, you click, oh hello, I need to do this. Okay, click, off you go, and
However, it's not the same.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Well, it does mean less upward pressure on PA wages because the option's there, right? And that's part of that technological disruption.
Nothing like a great PA here.
Yep.
Sure. But I mean, it's kind of all about this feeling anyway, right? It's about the wealth effect and consumer sentiment. If we're not getting a good feeling about where our wages are going, then how are we going to go out and spend?
Well, economics is 95% psychology, in my view. I mean, I know that there'd be plenty of academics who'd argue with that, but that's how the broader community thinks about economics. It's how they feel. It's how secure they feel, how prosperous they feel, how much under pressure financially they feel. And as I think I mentioned a few weeks ago, we've done some research on this, and cost of living is clearly the #1 issue for most Australians. Job security is in the top 10, but it's not in the top 5.
Yeah.
So it's cost of living. A big part of that's energy prices.
Yep.
So you get this sense that I might be a little bit better off than I was, but it's all going to utilities or elsewhere.
And who knows where my job will go?
And this is something we were talking. I'm just thinking when you talk about anxiety. We were talked about a survey that came out from the NAB, which was saying that Aussies reckon we are basically angrier and more aggressive as a society, and I think this is why. Like they listed at various factors, social media and drugs and alcohol and all sorts of other things, but this is a big part of the story, isn't it?
The Productivity Commission has done a lot of work and says that essentially the income inequality is not growing, that it's actually, if anything, probably shrinking. And what's most interesting to me about that is not how the community is feeling about income equality. They're feeling that gap is getting wider.
Yeah. Angry.
So it's definitely a tough market to be confident in, and that's what you need to start a new business. Angela, we saw some interesting research about the fact that more than 50% of Aussies have considered starting a business, but then they just don't. So, you know, tall poppy syndrome, whatever it might be, they're just afraid. What do you think of the research?
So CGU brought out the Ambition Index. So it's a report and some research. They spoke to 2,000 Australians, 1,000 of which were small business owners, to ask them about their attitude towards small business. And the research found, as you said, more than 53% of Australians have actually thought about starting their own business. And out of the entire population, only 6% ever end up doing it. And it's the fear of failure and the tall poppy syndrome. So it's lack of ambition. The report even talked about lack of ambition for our country as well, that countries lack ambition, and that's what holds them back.
Because even if we have an idea and we're probably so scared of failing, we don't even mention it to anyone.
That's right. So we're scared of what 70% of people were scared of what others might think. 44% were scared of failure in their businesses, and there's stats to back that up when startups, you know, within the first 3 years tend to fail, 40-odd% of them. So it's that tall poppy syndrome. It's the fact that they seem to lack ambition to risk moving forward for fear of what others might say, and that's really going to put a dent in our entrepreneurs.
It's a sad cultural indictment, that one, but I mean, how do you go about kind of encouraging ambition?
Well, if we could, we need to make it cool. We need to make it okay, and that we need to celebrate others when they do have that ambition to want to start a business and grow. And if we can just get stats from being 6% starting a business to 16%, we can add $2 billion a year to the GDP.
Oh.
We need to cut red tape. I'm sorry.
Well,
I think it's starting a business and running a business is tough.
And you know that as much as anyone.
Feelings and emotions do come into it.
Well, sure, but I mean, it's just
risk.
so hard.
You look at the rent you're about to pay for.
Just so hard.
Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it is always my advice. Don't overthink it because you won't do it. I spend more time worrying about buying a handbag than I do signing a lease on a business.
Really?
One requires a lot of thought and consideration. A lease is in black and white.
You're definitely...
Handbag, how it fits in your life. Hey,
I need to spend more time worrying about handbags, sounds like. I don't think much about handbags, actually.
Speaking of overthinking and underthinking, Royal Commission going on, final round now. We've seen CBA in the spotlight. The bosses copping it, really. You know, we saw Matt Comyn laying a lot of the blame of the issues at his predecessor's feet. Greg, what do you think? Well,
I declare an interest because I provide advice to Commonwealth Bank on a range of issues. But I actually, to be honest, think that this notion of, you know, him throwing people under the bus, or even Catherine Livingstone today throwing former directors under the bus, I actually think it's a pretty naive interpretation. I mean, these people are under oath in a judicial proceeding. They're taken to documents that are 2, 3, 4 years old, and they're asked to comment on what they thought about at the time, having made contemporaneous notes or having written documents. So I don't think it was a question of throwing people under the bus. It was simply a fact that at that time, for either Matt Comyn or Catherine Livingstone, they had a different opinion, even then, about some of the things that were going on. I mean, it is a fact that they had a difference of opinion. And it's also a fact that some of the things that the bank was doing back then were clearly not in any way meeting community expectations. I mean, my sense of it is the criticism of them would be far more valid if they had come in and tried to defend what the bank had done previously, or as the new leaders, not change it. So it's sort of, to me, it's one of those things, you know, the classic damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, because one of the things that people said about today was that the Westpac boss struck a much more kind of defiant tone about the whole thing. Did you think that?
I did, and I think that he'll be back tomorrow, and I suspect that Michael Hodge, the baby-faced assassin, as he's called, will probably up the volume a little bit.
I'd say smiling-faced assassin, but he doesn't smile too much, does he?
But I think that, so to me, it's not about blame shifting. I think all of the banks, and particularly Commonwealth, have on numerous occasions now accepted responsibility for the things that have gone wrong and accepted the need
failed their consumer and customer.
Exactly, and that they need to put things right. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Yeah. So rather than sort of go through the entrails of, you know, 3-year-old memos, I think it'd be much more productive, particularly in this final round of hearings, to focus on the sort of policy and regulatory initiatives, which is really what this round was supposed to be about, that will help give the Commission an idea about what it needs to recommend when it's finished its work.
Angela?
On a positive side, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Philip, did comment on that cultures need to change internally and not just through regulation and penalties and consequences. So to change that culture, something else had to be done. If I was a cynic, I would say that one of the reasons... if I was a cynic, I would say that Mr Common was promoted from within, and that was because they could see the writing on the wall of what was happening. If you bring in a new CEO from the outside, they want to clean up the place and start fresh and heads will roll. I think there was obvious that there was consequences, bad stuff happening towards consumers. There is evidence of that very clearly, that it's been going on for some years. I think he did, and others, threw others under the bus because it was convenient to do so, because you either fall on your sword or you're going to say it's someone else's fault. But I'm here now and I'll take responsibility for the change. However, he was part of that culture. And of course, the only way out was for him to either leave or blow the whistle, and he couldn't do either of those things.
Well, I think one of the explanations that Catherine Livingstone gave today, she reckons it'd be virtually impossible to find a banker anywhere in the world who'd not been compromised by scandals, which says a lot about the state of play in the world right now.
She made that comment, and then the gallery laughed, and then she said, "I'm not joking."
God, well, this is it, isn't it?
How much don't we know is what I fear.
Yeah,
How much don't we know?
It's fantastic spectator sport, really, and we wait. Obviously, for the
real-world implications.
Absolutely.
I note that there's been a bit of chat about small business credit tightening up a lot. And Philip, more than
on the one hand, you know, they've always had tightening of small business credit, always have. I know that the PM's come out and said, you know, there's $2 billion there available, but of course, you know, then they're all going, well, you want us to tighten the regulations and now you want us to give them more money, but they're the big risk.
Basically, the credit teams have no idea what the hell's going on.
Correct.
So they're all just stalling. It's my info. They all just stall small business people saying, oh, we'll just chat next week.
I'm sorry, but surely this improved focus on responsible lending is actually a good thing. You don't want to be giving money to people who can't...
But the pendulum's going way too far the other way.
You think?
Yes.
Oh, and then they come out and say that small business is always going to be the first one that's not going to honour their debt. I disagree with that. Yeah, we take our debt very seriously.
Now, we've got to get in one more topic before we finish, by the way.
Dr Google?
Dr Google. We did provide you just a glimpse into the future earlier today of what we might talk about. Yeah, the serious health conditions in which we search on Google for apparently increased 8,800% in the last 3 years. I don't Google my own ailments, I must say, but I Google my kids' potential ailments crazily.
That's different, just to find out if facts. I understand that. I do that with my nieces.
Yes.
But not for myself.
I don't do it for myself.
And as I said, when Dr Google can provide a script online, I'm there. Until then, I might just rely on the person that's had decades of training.
Good, good. So you go the traditional route,
Well,
Greg?
absolutely. I did a straw poll in my office, and 3 or 4 people said, we go to the doctor, and then they actually Google Dr Google while I'm sitting there. And I thought, get another doctor.
You know what? I know vets who go out to the back and Google a few things as well.
Cat has stopped breathing.
Yes.
What do I do?
I think everyone does it.
Put it down.
I just think, do we think it's a bad thing? It goes across so many industries, though. There's this oversupply of information. Is it good?
Google is changing the logarithms in order to address this and sort of make it a little bit harder, I guess, to find the actual cause of your problems when you list all your symptoms, which could actually match a terminal illness and you only have a cold. So
they usually do, actually.
Too much information in the wrong hands is not good.
No.
True, but I mean, there've been some...
it's a new business model.
Well, this is the thing. This is what I'm sort of getting to, which is that there's some businesses out there that now operate as a plumber. If, you know, let's say the bottom of my sink just blows out in the middle of the night, I get on a kind of a video link to someone who might be in the US, in Arizona, and says, OK, here's how you fix it. So Dr Google, yes, it gives you a lot of information, but yeah, when's it going to be kind of practical information? When are you going to be able to hop on Google and somebody goes, OK, you know, your kid's having a really tough time, here's what you do.
FaceTime with the doctor.
Well, it's very different fixing your sink to having an appendectomy. I mean,
it's all the same, Greg, come on.
When you're dying,
see one, do one, teach one. You see the appendectomy on Dr Google, you do it, and next thing you know, you're a professor.
I think that sums up my reservation.
I guess I was talking more about the really simple stuff.
The Botox article this morning? 4 hours, you can do a Botox course in the morning, and by lunchtime, you're actually having clients.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 4 hours.
I saw the one about the screen time that's going to give my kids cancer, but, I didn't want to go too far in that article. Oh, gosh. Another thing to feel guilty about. Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you, Greg. Great to see you both.